I am Jacqueline Pitts. I am the Director of Communications here at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and I am joined today by an incredible panel who are going to talk about their life experiences and how we can fix critical areas of struggles we have in the state with addiction and recovery. So I am not going to do a lot of talking today. I am going to let our wonderful panel of Kentuckians talk. Some of you might recognize Kenneth Bearden from an interview we did on the Bottom Line recently. So I'm going to start with Kenny, and then we're going to have everybody kind of tell their stories. That's how we're going to kick this off. And so Kenny, I'll let you talk about, when your struggle with addiction started and what it looked like for you.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for having me out today, Jacqueline. So my name's Kenneth Bearden, and I am from Louisville, Kentucky. So my struggle with substance abuse started at the age of 11. At the age of 11, I had tried substances for the first time, and by the end of that summer, I had overdosed 7 times already. I'm one of them people that once I put a mind or mood altering substance in my body, I cannot stop. I've been in a lot of jails and institutions as a teenager and as an adult. And somewhere along the line, enough was enough. And my addiction almost took me to death. Actually, I did die many times. I've overdosed over 30 times. And with that being said, that's a lot of numbers, but in the reality of all of it, like something somewhere along the line was keeping me alive to be here today. And I believe that my story has a purpose. My last use was an intentional overdose to take my own life. And I am still here by something outside of myself today to tell my story. I get to work in recovery today and get to help other people who have been through the same struggles. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be here today, Jacqueline, and to be sitting with these amazing panel members as well.
And before we move on to the next person, just to let everybody know, Kenny, I'll let you go ahead and tell people about your role that you're in now.
So the role that I'm in now, I work with addiction recovery care. I am the community liaison for a company, and my role now is essentially a marketing position where I share and build resources with other agencies and entities in the community, and I'm also a frontline support for anyone trying to get into treatment. What that looks like is I hold space for anyone trying to find resources to go into treatment, and I start building a relationship with that person right away and work directly with our intake team and transportation specialists to get people in there as fast as possible. We know that it's a small time limit when somebody decides to get into treatment, and I provide that early on support and support throughout the recovery process.
Perfect. And now I'm going to move to Rickey Green. And this is just great for me too, because as I've gotten to know these wonderful panelists over the last couple of weeks as we set this up, other than Kenny, this is my first time hearing a lot of these stories as well. So Rickey, why don't you go ahead and get started with your story?
Sure. Just want to make sure my mic's on and everything. You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. Yeah, my name's Rickey Green. I have been sober since 2006. I'm originally from Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where I was born and raised. And I grew up poverty, right? It was me and mom, and it was free lunch and clearance racks, right? So I remember I first tried substances in 7th grade when I realized I had the male role models in my life where they were raised the same way I was, and in their professional life, they sold illegal substances, right? So that's what I had to look to, and that's what I mimicked. That's what I followed. I started behaving that way in 7th grade. And I remember life was just so heavy already from us being poor, mom being a depressive and constantly just breaking down over, how tough life was, right? And I remember, I just wanted to make mom better. Very early on, 7, 8, 9 years old, I was trying to to coach Mom up and let her know that we were going to be fine, right? And as a result, by the time I realized that what that male role model I described, that Mom brought him in, he was a stepdad, what he was doing, and I realized that I could do that as early as 7th grade, and it made me feel better. It made me okay. And when I started doing that and behaving that way, as much as that behavior made me feel better, I was also using every substance I could get my hands on. And it was just so good because like I realized that I could make it better. I had the power to make my situation better. That's what I learned as a 12-year-old who was experimenting with substances, who I just wanted a way out, you know? And I fell in love with it instantly. And my entire adolescent, like that's what I was doing. I got to school early so I could distribute that. And the whole time I was doing whatever I was distributing, it was bad. I'm not proud of that, but it did set the course for my life today, right? I said I've been sober since 2006, and I'm just so grateful for the Volunteers of America, namely, right? I did go on to have a run-in with police, and I was charged. I had one time I got in trouble that resulted in a 5-year prison sentence that was probated because it was my first time. I ruined that. They revoked my probation and sent me to prison, and I had the opportunity to go get help at Volunteers of America here in Louisville. And it was just the best thing that's ever happened to me, right? I mean, it literally rebooted my life. I had the opportunity then to get enrolled in college, which was never on the radar. I realized that what had been my challenge. I always thought that was just my path that I was going to go down. And when I got there, I learned that I had an illness. The addiction education there was first class, second to none. And I won't steal his part of the story, but like Dave, I can't wait to hear what he has to say about that, because Dave and I have walked the same path, and we met right there in 2006 at the Volunteers of America. Since then, I've been so fortunate. I'm now a pardoned felon. Governor Beshear pardoned me in 2015. And now I've been able to start a couple businesses. I'm a small business owner. And most recently, I've gotten to, with the music, I think all of us who are sober, there's a kind of an obligation to those coming after us, right? To kind of when a man's or a woman is down in the hole in the pit, we reach down and we say, hey, or not reach down. We jump in the pit with her, Jacqueline. We jump in the pit with them and we say, hey, we know the way out, right? So that's kind of an obligation that comes with being on the path we're on. And instead of just doing that, when I'm at a meeting and a newcomer approaches me, I've chosen now to do that with my music. I've most recently been releasing music for, it's called the Face Off EP, and it's just that, right, where I publicly own my situation, my story. It's okay. I'm an addict, and it's okay. I'm a convicted felon, and it's okay, right? Because I remember what it was like to be walking the streets of Louisville trying to find a job, landing one. It was for $6.50 an hour. And I remember, Jacqueline, I remember what that felt like, to know that my life was over and I have ruined it, and I have to accept that, and that is as good as it's ever going to get. So what I'm doing now with the music and with my life, I'm creating connections everywhere I can, because I want to make that story as loud as possible. I want to make the ripple of that as big as possible. And I want to have the largest impact I can on everybody who's still there, everybody who's coming behind me. So the opportunity to get to speak for the chamber, with the chamber on this topic, it blows my mind, and I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. So I'll talk all day. I'm going to take that cue to like stop.
Well, that is such a great point, Rickey, because that's exactly why we're holding this webinar here today, is because it is so important for you all to be able to share your voices and for people to hear your voices, because you all are the people that make people who are currently struggling understand that there is something on the other side, that there is something to work toward. And that's why we are so grateful that you're sharing your stories here today. And I know Amanda Hall, who is with the ACLU, a lot of you on this call may recognize her from the halls of the Capitol. I know I do. She's been using her voice here in Frankfurt a lot as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to tell her story, which is a great one as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline and the Chamber, for having me, and thanks to all the fellow panelists for being so brave and smashing stigma and talking about recovery. So I'm originally from the big city, the big county of Martin County, Kentucky, out in eastern Kentucky. And, like some of my fellow panelists, I grew up poor, grew up in low-income housing apartments and, trailer courts. And I remember, the church on Christmas, when we didn't have enough gifts, the church would help us out. I had a single mom who was amazing and did the very best that she could. In my teens, I started to experiment with drugs and alcohol. I also had anxiety issues. I suffered from other underlying mental health conditions, and the drugs and alcohol would sort of ease that. Then, unfortunately, later in my teens, I got access to some prescriptions for some more high-powered things, and my addiction just took off. As a woman and a lot of men in recovery, I think it would be remiss of me not to talk about trauma that so many folks in recovery has experienced. And so I am also a survivor of sexual violence and a lot of those underlying traumas that happen. So I ended up going to jail continuously, in and out. And then I was never, asked if I needed help. I think everyone knew that I did. And unfortunately, there just wasn't the resources back then that existed either. So I think that needs to be mentioned, and how Kentucky continues to grow their resources for folks that have substance use disorder. And I hope we can continue to see that expand. And then I ended up in prison. After prison, I was able to go to the Women's Healing Place in Louisville. And I think, like some other folks mentioned, that saved my life as well. It's fundamentally miraculous what will happen if folks that have these issues actually have support and resources and treatment and help available. And that's really what that place gave me. Not only, education about my substance use disorder, but this community and connections and people that understood. So after that, I decided to go back to college, which was a little scary with my felony convictions. You have to write all these essays, basically why you're worthy, and always fear of not being accepted. And then trying to get a job. At first, I worked 3 different ones because no one would hire me full time. And just kept clawing my way. And I think that it's important too, like I mentioned earlier, that I had those privileges and I had those resources. And I think of the folks that don't have that supportive community. So if you know someone in your life that's suffering from substance use disorder, I really hope you find it in you to have that compassion and to be that support for people in recovery. It really is life-changing. So here in May, I graduated from U of L with my master's in social work.
Nice.
I went on to be the program director of the Healing Place, that place that I went after prison. I was the program director for years there, and I never wanted to leave. And this is I would develop very close relationships with parents, and I remember there was a father that had called me, and his daughter had actually died from detoxing in a county jail. And he would, I think because I was in recovery and gave him hope and gave him someone to talk to, I think our relationship meant a lot to him. And he had called me one day and said, I wish somebody could do something. I wish somebody could help these people, and it was just so sad. And I said, I do too, but have these felony convictions. It ain't going to be me. You know what I mean? Like I do too, but I can't change no laws. I can't do anything. And literally that night I went and prayed for this family, and I prayed for solace. And the next day I saw an email that the ACLU of Kentucky, which I knew little to nothing about, was hiring someone for a policy job in criminal justice reform, which of course I knew substance use disorder and recovery. Those are so intertwined. And it's so funny, all these jobs that I couldn't get, in the job description, it said, people with personal experience with the criminal justice system are encouraged to apply. I was like, what? Never has that happened. And I felt like it was my purpose and thing that I had to do. So that's how I work a lot with the chamber now, and I work on justice reform. I get to work with legislators from around the state on substance use disorder issues, and yeah, and I get to be on panels with all you cool folks.
And as someone who has seen Amanda in action in the halls of the Capitol, I can tell you all that she is making incredible difference for the state of Kentucky, especially with these criminal justice issues that we're trying to get passed at the state level. So huge shout out to Amanda. And that was a great point that you made too, Amanda, about not being able to get a job or being scared to get a job at first. And this being a chamber panel, we're definitely going to get into that, what you all want to tell the employers in terms of people who are interviewing with them, and when they want to redo their HR policies and hire people who are in recovery. I definitely want them to, I've looked at the participant list. I know we've got some great business people on here today. So I definitely want to get into that, but now I'm going to turn it over to David to tell us his story. I know he's doing some great work in counseling now, but this is my first time hearing David's story too. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me. My name's David Tarullo. I'm the owner of the Revolution in Counseling, which operates a long-term treatment program for men with substance use disorders and or criminal justice issues in their life. Took over this program after a long legacy of Ron McKiernan's work in the Louisville area. A little bit about me. I'm a Catholic Louisvillian. I grew up middle upper class family. So I'm pretty privileged compared to some of my cohorts here. That being said, I did grow up with some traumatic backgrounds. My parents divorced when I was 3. My father was a very active alcoholic all of my life, who was very disconnected from my day-to-day. With a very abusive brother all of my life. And I grew up with a single mom who really held it all together and worked put herself through nursing school when we were kids, and really kind of took care of us. So I grew up with some of those templates for addiction in my life. I was exposed to alcohol use a lot. And I think for me, I picked up on a lot of antisocial personality features and really gravitated that as a way to cope with who I was and my situation and to protect myself. So I was really interested in criminal-like things growing up, and that's what I gravitated towards. And eventually I picked up, using marijuana at an early age. At about 13, it was the time that I really remember picking up marijuana and getting high for the first time, and something clicked inside of me, and what we call the to use took over my life at that point. And I was 13 years old, and looking back, that's, I was just a kid, and that became the center point of my motivations around life, and that led me through years of pain and failure and addiction. For me, I ended up using a lot of different drugs along the way, and I got hold of alcohol in a big way at some point in that time. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was just a drunk, and I would come in hungover every single day to go to school. So bad that my mouth would be raw and I couldn't eat lunch because I had drank so much the night before. And like Kenny was talking about, I had multiple overdoses, and this was before heroin. So I used to overdose on alcohol. I mean, I'd end up in the hospital, get my stomach pumped on several occasions as just a kid, and so addiction really just grabbed a hold of me. I had a lot of the template for it with my personality and some of my behaviors before that, But when addiction took over, I mean, it took everything. And by the time I was 20, I was an adult now. So I had been getting locked up from the time I was 14 all the way up until I got sober. But when I turned 18, you know, they wouldn't just give me, oh, you're just a Catholic white kid, we're going to let you off the hook. They started putting things on your record. And so I had just a slew of charges from the time I was 18 until I was 20. And then when I was 20, I got in, I had a nice little run for a couple days on drugs and alcohol. And I got in a car wreck of a car that wasn't mine that was stolen. And I racked up a slew of felony charges all at one time, and about 6 or 7 of them. And I went to jail, and like many times before, but this time it was kind of like, just so happened that that person that I got in a hit and run car accident with was a prosecutor's wife in the Louisville area. And so they kind of had a strong push for me to go to prison around this. And I had a record behind me. And, you know, what happened for me was, wasn't that I just hit rock bottom and messed up everything. I've been doing that my whole life. And it was that I got put into a cage, a concrete cell. And it was the first realization that I wasn't really ever going to get out at any certain time in the future. And there was an intervention that was done. And my parents had come across this guy named Ron McKiernan, who had worked with the criminal justice system and getting people out of prison and jail and going into long-term treatment. And he showed up at court, and I signed up for a 2-year treatment program with him. And it just so happened that they let me out. And I didn't learn until later that them letting me out that day was actually a miracle and a gift and grace. I didn't know about the prosecutor's wife thing yet, and but they let me out to go to treatment. And I went to treatment at 20 years old, hadn't taken a legal drink in my life yet, and had already spent many years ruining everything. And it was due to that intervention and my family having boundaries and the legal justice system having some boundaries with me that put me in a point of desperation to really be motivated to do something different in my life. And when I got into treatment, I was in there for the long haul. This was a 2-year ordeal, 2-year agreement. And slowly but surely, change started to take place in my life. And I saw the devastation that alcoholism had done to my life. And that wasn't really who I was behind all of that. It took me a long time to really get there. And that was about the time I met Rickey. And about that time that change started happening when I was at the facility that he was at as part of my program. And, you know, somewhere along the way in that process, you know, I think I got up on the board and taught a class for the first time. It was part of an assignment or something. And I felt like a magic happened for me that it felt like this is what I should be doing. And ended up devoting my life to being in this field. And I ended up going back to school when I got out of there. I didn't go to prison, resolved the case. And I completed a bachelor's degree in social work, a master's degree in social work. I ended up getting licensed for mental health counseling and a license for substance use counseling and other different just licenses and trainings along the way. And you know, I've ran a long-term men's homeless shelter at St. Vincent de Paul for about 5 years. And then I went to another place, and you know, I recently bought and took over Ron McKiernan's old program, the guy that helped me. He passed away in 2012, and his daughter has been running it since then. And I approached them about what they were doing in the future, and we worked out a thing, and I bought the program from them. So now I do what he does, and it has been quite the honor and quite the project so far. And we get to help men that are going to prison or have reached a point where they need something serious and long term. And we get to take them in and watch them and walk them through changing their life. And just like what was done for me. And that's a little bit about my story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And thank you all again so much for having the courage to tell your stories here today. I mean, really, I think that I talked to Kenny about this when we did our interview. You know, more and more of us are starting to meet people who have struggled with addiction and who are starting to be more open about that fact. Before, our stigmas started to change, but now that we all sort of know someone that has struggled and know their story and know what they're doing now, I think it helps a lot. And if anybody on this call has never met someone before, now you've met 4 wonderful people who have struggled and who are doing great things. And this is already such a great conversation, because bringing up the fact that a lot of you came from the same socioeconomic background, but David a little bit different. And this issue in particular knows no socioeconomic bounds. And we're going to talk even more at a later date about some more diversity issues in terms of this subject as well, but also talking about the mental health stuff that goes along with this. I remember Kenny telling me when we did our interview how critical the therapy part of this was, and you all recognizing the trauma and things that led to this. And I think it's so important for people to understand where some of these issues begin as well. So, but we're going to go ahead and move on. I think a lot of you guys have talked about it, but one of the questions that came in before this panel was, at what point did you know without a doubt that it was time for you to seek help and that you knew it was kind of going to work? So again, I know a lot of you touched on it, so we'll do this pretty quick, and we'll start with Rickey this time.
No chance to prepare. All right, so I think it was like for me, I'm not going to read that. I'll read it later. So I was to the point where I had tried every combination, right? There's a part that David referenced, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that I will somehow, someday control and enjoy the use of alcohol, right? Well, that is a delusion. And I had taken it to the point to where I could see through it now. I've tried every combination. Nothing else was working. My best friend was depressed, and Jacqueline and I introduced him to stuff that he'd never seen before or done before, and the next day he took his own life. And that was at the end. Like, that was November 17th of 2005. After his funeral on November 29th, 2005, that's when I told the courts that I'd been faking screens, and they revoked my probation. So it got to the point to where I could no longer talk myself into thinking everything's okay. That's my answer.
Amanda, I'll move to you next.
Yeah, so I had wanted to get help and had went to some short-term detoxes, and I would go right back to, you know, the same environment. And not that that is the only factor, but I had no other support either. You know what I mean? Like, I had no folks in recovery. So in prison, you know, you would think maybe prison was my rock bottom, but honestly and truthfully, from being in there, separated from my the people I love, being 4 hours away, you know, I never got a visit the whole time I was in prison. I would literally think about using, because it hurt so bad. So it wasn't prison for me. It was actually when I got out, seeing these people, like I said, that support. Like, the answer to substance use disorder in so many instances is really connection, and knowing folks that are in recovery and feeling and seeing these people that had done it and that were genuine. And I think that was really, and whenever I finally stepped into dealing with that underlying trauma that for so long I had pushed down and pushed down, the combination of those things, having that support and that connection, and dealing with the reason I got high in the first place and my mental health. It was like a few different components together, but in that supportive environment and around those people in recovery, I could find a way to do all those.
That's awesome. And David, I'll go to you next.
Okay, what comes to mind for me is, addiction is an unstoppable force that like attaches to an individual and manifests through all parts of them. And, the original core, innocent, beautiful human soul that they are is in there. But like when addiction takes over, it takes over mind, choices, mentality, motivation, and it really manipulates a person. And, for me, it wasn't about wanting to get help. I didn't see that as like a viable way of living, being sober ever. That wasn't something I wanted or had anywhere close to even be able to conceptualize that. So I think it was, my big thing is, people get better when there's intervention. Something stops the cycle. And whether that be an employer, oftentimes employers are like, hey, man, you can't do this anymore. And you got to get some help, and we're willing to help you get help. I've seen a lot of people who are very employable get help that way. But people who are not employable, they'll end up at the criminal justice system. That's a form of intervention that stops what's happening. But it has to be followed up with treatment. It has to be followed up with a new way of being. And there has to be something that gives them a solution and gives them a way out and gives them time to come out of what addiction has done to their mind. So I don't think there really is a rock bottom. If, addiction just keeps going unchecked without intervention, it will kill somebody or take everything from them. And, recovery almost always comes from some kind of disruption to that. Whether that be family, legal justice system, employers. And it's not always that way. Some people are a lot more functional in addiction and have been able to maintain a normal lifestyle, but they really hurt themselves and everyone around them because of being intoxicated in all their free time. That's sometimes a little different, but it still comes from some kind of intervention from the employer, the family. So for me, I don't really believe in rock bottom. I think that's just when people say it, when they finally got stopped enough to look at what was happening, and that's how it was for me. I got into jail and I knew I wasn't getting out, and I was a kid, I acted tough all my life, but I knew it was about to get real. And there's nothing worse than having the obsession to use and being locked in a cell and knowing that there might not be any time soon that I'm ever going to get out of here, and I don't have freedom anymore. And that was enough for me to consider something different. So that's kind of my thoughts about rock bottom and what it takes for, someone to decide to get help.
Those are all great thoughts, and I definitely want to talk about the employer part of this next. But first, I'm going to ask Kenny to tell his story of what the final straw was for him.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's really hearing everyone else speak before me, I'm able to connect the dots in each piece. That, as David was speaking on the intervention, for me was the intentional overdose, intentional suicide attempt at the end for me, and waking up in the hospital. And it really took a lot of pain and turmoil and torment and hatred of self, of myself, to get me there. I hated who I had become and what I had done, the father that I was not being, and the man that I knew was there but could never really be. Yeah, it took the pain to get me there. And it took the pain and even death and being brought back to life, and literally speaking. I did absolutely anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid myself. And like Amanda was speaking about, I didn't know it at the time until I got into recovery, but a lot of my actions were ways to cope and not feel because of these underlying traumas that I had never dealt with. And once I really started to dig into them traumas and really start to uncover and unravel my ways of dealing with life and things that I had learned, how I had learned how to deal with life at a young age, and how that was playing a role in the man that I am today, I had no help. There's no way that I could change. And so then for me was the pain, was the torment, and just not being the dad that I truly knew was there but could never really be.
Thank you all so much again for sharing those remarks. We've already gotten some great comments, and a question that goes right along with my question I have about employment here at the Chamber, obviously, and with this initiative we're running called Kentucky Comeback. The whole point is to get employers involved, people across the state involved in making key advancements in terms of recovery, criminal justice reforms, and changing the stigma around these issues, making sure that employers become fair chance employers and giving them the tools to do so. All of that is on our website, KentuckyComeback.com. Shameless plug, please join the network on that website so you can help us make these changes. But because this is largely employer focused too, obviously we always hear that gainful employment plays a huge role in terms of getting people back on track, either after incarceration or after addiction as you're going into recovery. David, I'm going to start with you and ask you, what are some of your thoughts on how Kentucky businesses, companies, employers can, what they should be thinking about in terms of their hiring processes, and when somebody with a record or that's in recovery applies for a job at their company, you know, how to move forward with that? How can they better help people in recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's really good that we're like talking about how to actually do that. You know, so first I'd like to say it's probably, as an employer, not a good idea to hire somebody in active addiction and with various behaviors, and I think that would be a setup for everybody, you know. But also, when I came into recovery, and I grew up during the crack epidemic in America, you know, and so when I came into recovery, that was towards the end of that, and that was probably the highest level of criminalization of addiction that we've ever seen. And the prison population went from 1 million to 2 million during the 90s during that epidemic. And so when I came in, it was the first start of the first wave of amphetamines in America, and they were really throwing people life sentences for that. And so there was like, you know, you got felonies written off, and you're like part of this shadow of America over here, you know, and there was no real question of you having rights or being employable, and that's really bad. So like when I came into recovery, it was still, that was what we were coming out of, and that's not good, you know. And I think what's important for employers to know is that I think there needs to be some integration with employers to treatment and them understanding what's happening with people. I wouldn't ever say like, yeah, you should just hire people in recovery and stuff like that without really knowing who they are. I think everybody deserves to present who they are and be open about, this is on my record. This is what I have done about it. This is how long I've been in recovery. Here's some things about that I can show. Then this is what I do day to day to stay sober, you know, and this is my life today. You know, that's very different. That's a personal connection with an employer and presenting who they are. You know, the people that I went to treatment with and stuff, there was employment that was part of our treatment program. They partnered with Johnson's Commercial Flooring back then, and they hired every single person who came into that program. And, I will say the people that I worked with and that were in treatment, they probably worked harder and had better outcomes employment-wise than the average person, because they're coming from a place of, this is a shot that I have, and I have some real making up to do for my life to get better. And that business became very successful, and we still partner with them today to employ people. So I think having employees assistance programs that look at these sort of things around hiring, and also active addiction cases within the workforce. You know, what do we do when we have those? I think there needs to be accountability, but also personalization. This is a human being who may have a history, but have they gotten help? Are they getting help? You know, so those are some of my thoughts about it. I think just a personal integration with people's cases and histories is very viable in the workforce that hasn't been there before.
And those are some great points. And I kind of want to follow up with you or anybody who wants to jump in on this. In terms of, if I'm an employer who is looking to hire someone who submitted an application, I know they're in recovery, like you said, maybe not hiring somebody in active addiction, but how do employers know when someone is ready fully? You know what I mean? I think that's kind of a question that a lot of employers have is, yes, you're in recovery, but what if? So how do you know when is the right time and how to handle that situation if so? Because like you said, even I know a lot of employers across the state are integrating some things about treatment, making sure it's on their health insurance plan, a lot of things like that. But a lot aren't. So how do you handle those situations, and how do you know when someone is ready to come on with a full-time career at your company? And again, David and anybody else that wants to jump in on this.
Well, I would say there's kind of multiple dimensions of that. You know, am I an employer who wants to be the type of employer that's working with people early in treatment? That would take some initiative, some resource, extra accountability, and some real work on the employer side of things. It could have good outcomes, but it's certainly not going to come without, you know, some effort, and there's a lot of risk in that. You know, early from, you know, in recovery, their risk for relapse and not maintaining employment. I would say that if there's somebody with a year or more recovery and a strong action behind what they do day to day and stuff like that, I would say that they could be just as much a good employee as any other person out there in the world. You know, once they hit like a year, you know, 2 years, I mean, this is a person that should be treated just like anybody else. And but you know, if I'm working with people earlier on in the process, and I know that they're early in the process, I think there just needs to be maybe some extra support around that, maybe some accountability around, are they continuing to stay in the treatment that they agree to and things like that. I think if employers, you know, partner up like that, it would produce a lot better outcomes for people who are trying to get sober and integrate into life. Those are some of my thoughts about that.
Great. We have 15 minutes left, just so everybody has a warning, and I may go over participants because I think we have a 15-minute pad. I'm already ready to do a second webinar with the 4 of these people or do separate interviews. So Ricky, you want to go ahead and weigh in? Just a warning.
Wanted to speak. I don't want to speak too much about it because I don't know enough to speak intelligently, right? But I am aware of a guy that I want to link up with you in this whole process because he's been doing this. I know his company is called Facilities Management Services. That's what I was looking up over here because in my Action Shots role, I had the opportunity to do a short video about him. And there's this whole approach that he's a leader in. And I can't wait for you guys to meet each other because he's, they term it conscious capitalism, right? And instead of making an exception to to hire us, people with a background, people in recovery, they actually are geared towards it, right? They focus on it, they build it, and their turnover numbers, and again, I don't know enough to just speak to it, but I wanted to make sure that I spoke to it before this was over, because I want to link the two of you, because I think it really like takes this conversation in another direction. Instead of just making an exception, it's actually the intention of it, and the numbers speak for themselves. So.
Perfect. I want to go ahead and ask another question just so that we can keep this moving, because like I said, I could talk about this stuff forever now. But we had a question come in about how does someone help a loved one that they know that's struggling with substance use disorder? I think a lot of us don't know the right way to approach it. Maybe you've tried before, and like David's been talking about, you know, kind of intervention is a huge part of this. But Kenny, if you want to start on this, if someone knows somebody that's struggling or has a loved one, how would you suggest that they get involved in helping them?
Well, first of all, I would suggest them sitting down personally with that loved one and having the tough conversation, having a true heart-to-heart, so to speak, with them. And at the same time, when I say heart-to-heart, I mean setting very clear boundaries. Very similar to an intervention if someone else was doing it from the outside, but for me, I think I see more successful coming from the family, it being more personal. If they're able to do that without the outside source, I've seen that be successful. And it really does come down to setting boundaries with the person suffering from substance use disorder. There is a ton of resources, and as everyone's becoming more aware, we have more resources out there. And if that doesn't work, then reaching out to an outside resource like an interventionist or other recovery-related communities, and bringing someone else in who has been in their shoes. Because I know that some family members out there, they just don't know. Or it's too hard for them to put their own bias and their own beliefs to the side, and to really be able to reach that person at the needed one-on-one level to help influence significant change. And I think that's something else that they could do as well, is they could read up on it. So family members, if you're not suffering, or if you haven't battled substance use disorder, going to some Al-Anon meetings and really learning from other Al-Anon meetings as well, before, and really becoming educated around the disease concept, and being more aware before approaching that person right away.
Amanda, I want to ask you a question about criminal justice reforms too, and ways that we can make policy changes at the state level to help with these issues. Because again, Amanda's doing great work at the Capitol with the ACLU. And again, the whole point of this Kentucky Comeback initiative is to get a lot of these policies changed at the state level and within companies. But joining the network, again, shameless plug, make sure you do that. We're gonna send an email right after this to make sure that you do, is to contact your legislator. We're gonna help you do that to make sure that they know that you want these things done, because that is the best way for these type of policies to pass, when all Kentuckians tell them they want these things done. So we've talked a little bit about expungements and pardons, and we've heard a couple comments about those. And we did pass expungement laws, but Amanda, if you want to talk some more about what else needs to be done in Kentucky to kind of address some of the things we've been talking about today.
Yes, and I could talk about this for a long time as well, but I'll try to keep it limited. I think that something which doesn't completely have to do with the criminal justice system, but to me it does as well, a gray area, I think, around prevention. I just want to, in Kentucky children are #2 in the nation to have had a parent that's been incarcerated. And they're #1 to be children that are being raised by someone other than their, biological parents. And that is a direct result of addiction in the state and over incarceration. So I think that we are really failing at looking at those trauma supports I don't think I heard a lot of people on here with some trauma. I didn't hear a whole lot of trauma intervention at an early age. Often we are trying to be reactive as opposed to proactive. And even that can be peer support specialists, young folks. We see recovery high schools. We see all kinds of initiatives around the state. So that's something thinking outside of the box. Or even if you're an employer, making sure that your employees have, like I heard, employers are getting set up to provide treatment and different resources, those mental health resources to make sure that families, children, folks that suffer from substance use disorder have that. But I think prevention is something we do not talk about enough at all. But for folks that are engaged, are involved in the criminal justice system, everything down to juvenile justice, we need to have restorative practices that include substance use disorder resources for our youth. That you heard us all too. I think we all as teenagers started using drugs and alcohol again, to be able to divert those kids into programs to deal with these issues as opposed to just incarceration. And even those kids that end up in that correctional institution, like what does our programming look like for those kids when it comes to mental health and substance disorder? Then when you come over to the adult side, again, we really need, my dream would be to divert people on the front end. We talked about those interventions, and that is one. And like a real diversion, a level of care diversion, like not a one size fits all, but when these people enter that justice system, what is the best level of care for that fit for this person? Though my recovery looks the way it does, my recovery isn't the only route to it. So people that end up in it, we need more programming in jails and prisons. I was locked up for over a year and was on a waiting list the whole time while I was there to get in the substance abuse program, a whole year, and never got into it, the whole time. So if we think that putting people in jail and prison is going to solve this, it isn't. Statistics show, research study after research study, that people are 3 times more likely to overdose and die after leaving jail. So I think it's something everyone should be highly aware of. Like, folks have to have these resources. We can't keep. I think that we need to look at what the war on drugs has done, especially in our Black communities. I think when we do these diversion programs and have these conversations, we need to make sure that Black Kentuckians are being diverted into these programs too. I know my fellow people in recovery, we know how diverse the recovery community is. So I know they're down with me to make sure that when we fight for these policies, that they are equitable and reach everyone. We need more diversion. This year, us and hopefully the chamber, I will bet so, will be working on a bill in the General Assembly. It almost passed last year. So folks with felony convictions do not have access to KEYS money. For folks that don't know what KEYS money is, that's from the sale of our Kentucky lottery. Some of those proceeds go to these scholarships. If you have a felony, you can't get those. So we have to be careful when we say, when you come out of incarceration, pull yourself up, when we are like cutting every way to do that. I want to expand expungement, voting. I could go on, but those are just some of them. I could go on.
And I think you've made some really amazing points. And honestly, as someone who's very new to this space, especially listening to all of your stories, the early intervention, especially how early you all got into and started to face issues, that was much earlier than I ever would have thought. So I think it's very good for people to understand when this is happening and why, with the trauma or the mental health issues, and addressing it early on. So I think that's a very, very good point. And we will definitely be working with you on some of those issues, and hopefully everyone else will too when they become a member of the network. Now, I'm gonna move to Rickey and ask you, we only have a couple minutes left, you guys, so Rickey, I want to ask you, when you were struggling and you started to make your way toward recovery, what do you wish that people had done, or, you know, any intervention or anything like that? What do you wish that facilities had done, or anyone, to help you that wasn't available at the time? How can we improve in helping people struggling with substance use disorder now?
At first, I didn't have an answer, but by the time you were finished, I have it. Like Amanda said, Amanda spoke to it. If it was not for my granny, Jacqueline, Barbara Faye Green, who showed up at that judge's courtroom every time drug court happened every week, and she waited until his docket was clear, and she said, "Have you found a place for my grandson?" every week. And it took 6 months, Jacqueline, for a bed to become available for me. Right? So I think there's this huge disparity. So that's my answer, is resources, available beds, right? Places to go. Like, I don't think, if 6 months, a year, Amanda, you waited a year and you still didn't get in. Did you say that? Yeah. So I think that, and that's still happening, right? I think we need more access to, and in my opinion, in my experience, long-term care, like a long-term process. So that's my answer.
All right, we have about 3 minutes left, you guys. So I am gonna go around and let everybody make some closing comments, anything that we did not cover during this webinar. And I hope everyone knows, and I hope that the 4 panelists here today know as well, that I will continue to be engaging with all of them and asking for their help on these issues. So you will continue to hear from them in one way or another, but I wanna go ahead and give them an opportunity to wrap up, and anything we didn't cover today. I'll start with Kenny. Anything you want people to know?
Just after Rickey answering that last question, we're growing. Addiction recovery care is growing, but that's one of the things and positions of support that I get to provide in my position as a community liaison. I work directly with alternative sentencing workers. I work directly with others in the community, and COVID barriers to the side, if we didn't have COVID going on right now, that's exactly what I would be doing, is showing up in the courtrooms and going down there and speaking with the judges. I've had a lot of meetings with prosecuting attorneys, working a lot with Casey's Law, and really being a voice for inmates and for people who are incarcerated at the time, helping to fast track services and set them up to get them out of jail and into treatment. That's a real big goal with addiction recovery care. And with us opening up Crown Recovery, that's going to be a very large facility. We're creating the resources and the beds to make that happen.
That's awesome. David, you're up next.
I guess I'd like to say that, you know, our long-term treatment program partners with employers, and that's a very big aspect of the success of our clients, is that they become very employable. They have income, and when they leave treatment, they have a very strong pattern of sustainability already. And we provide a very primary role in accountability and support, and you know, emotional healing around them maintaining employment and being on track and being where they're supposed to be, and transportation. So I think it's a really big deal in how people become successful in life, and especially in long-term recovery. So, you know, at the Revolution in Counseling, you know, if there's any employers that are interested in a partnership like that, we would be open to that. And I think that other employers, if they feel obligated around this or want this to be more successful, is to try and partner with somebody like that, and will provide the kind of support that they need to be employed there through the recovery process. So I'll just do a shout out to that. Very grateful for Johnson's Commercial Flooring, who did that for many years, and Leak Shield Pro, who is a new partner of ours that hires people that are coming in, and you know, so yeah, thank you for having me. This has been a good discussion and a good experience. So
absolutely, thank you, David. Amanda, what about you?
Yeah, from this, I would just want folks to remember that people in recovery are some of the most resilient, greatest folks that I've ever met. You know, we're your fellow Kentuckians. We're more than our worst mistakes. I remember my first full-time employer. Remember, I told you I had those 3 different jobs. Y'all, I would wear like the wrong outfit. I was a caterer, house cleaner, and I worked at a counseling center. So scrubs, a bow tie, and sweat clothes. So I was a disaster. But my first full-time employer hired me, and I was on parole, and it had been so hard. And I remember telling him, you know, I have to see my parole officer, you know, once a month. I will make up the hours. I'm so sorry if there was any. And he gave me that chance, and he supported me. And you know, I started to feel again, because I was so institutionalized. I'd been out of society at that point for years, and just how important that support and that employer was. So no matter what your role is in life, you know, you can really change lives and help folks, and it might take just a little bit of extra effort, but the return on investment. Like, look at Ricky and Kenny and David on here. Look how amazing they are. You know, like, if you're not hiring people in recovery and formerly incarcerated folks, you are missing out on some really amazing people. So I hope that the culture, and if you're thinking about it, do it in your heart.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think this conversation is a great way to start making those changes and seeing that action being taken across the state. And finally, we're going to wrap up with Rickey Green and your final comments.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on everything everybody else said, especially Amanda about hiring us. I think when it comes to problem-solving skills,
we can't hear you. Try. You were muted, and now you're unmuted. Still can't hear you. No. We're having a hard time hearing Rickey, you guys. Oh, there he was.
Hear me?
Yep.
I don't know. It's like it timed out or something. Okay, so I was talking about problem-solving skills. Like, you take someone who has not a dollar to their name, and by the end of that day, we've consumed $400 worth of illegal substances. When you get that kind of wheel in the right direction, right? Once that change has occurred, we're an asset to any organization. And I think I'm just excited to work with you, Jacqueline, to work with this whole conversation. With the music that I'm doing right now, I just released the first one from that, and it's about a child growing up in an addicted home. It's called Here We Go Again. And I'm in that process, what I'm doing is I'm connecting people. I'm using all the resources, all these board relationships that I've built over this time that I've been sober, and we're going to help as many people as we can, and we're going to make this conversation as loud as it can be, and we're going to stand in it. And I'm really proud and glad to get to stand with you all in this. And I look forward to having more of these conversations. And Jacqueline, I think we'll talk offline, but I know I have a lot of connections that can really help further you along. So I'm excited to get to serve in that way. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Like I said, you guys have already, all of you, been such a huge help. I can't wait to see how you can help us even more. Your voices are so critical to this conversation, the most critical voices, in my opinion. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I want to thank our 4 panelists for having the courage to tell their stories, teaching us all. And I already have so many ideas for our next webinars and conversations that we need to have. So thank you all again. Everybody who's been on this webinar will get a follow-up email about Restart Kentucky, and we will have the recording of this webinar as well. And we hope that you share it far and wide so even more Kentuckians can get involved and learn from this discussion. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.